This week we're reading From Seed to Plant by Gail Gibbons. Today we're going to work on our reader's notebook, pages 149 and 150. You will need your reader's notebook, pages 149 to 150, the copy of our story From Seed to Plant, and a pencil. Pause the video, and when you're ready, you can push play again. Page 149 says From Seed to Plant, Scientist's Notebook. Be a scientist. Study growing plants to see what happens. Take notes and make sketches in your research log. Today I'm going to work through this page with you and show you what I expect for you to do on page 150, which is very similar. So let's take a look. The first set of directions is read pages 352 to 353. So let's take a look at our book. Follow along with me. Before a seed can begin to grow, a grain of pollen from the stamen must land on the stigma at the top of the pistil of a flower like itself. This is called pollination. Pollination happens in different ways. Often, wind blows pollen from flower to flower. Bees, other insects, and hummingbirds help pollinate too. While they visit flowers for their sweet juice called nectar, pollen rubs onto their bodies. Then they carry the pollen to another flower where it comes off onto its pistil. If a pollen grain from a flower lands on the pistil, the same kind of flower, it grows a long tube through the pistil into an ovule. This is the beginning of a seed. The seeds grow inside the flower, even as the flower begins to die. As the seeds become bigger, a fruit or pod grows around them. The fruit or pod protects the seed. Now that we have read, we're going to take a look at our Reader's Notebook page. Describe what happens. Well, they've given us an awful lot of lines here and kind of left it up to us as to what we should do, which kind of leaves us confused when we're in second grade. So, what they want us to do is be a scientist. Scientists can take notes. When we write notes, remember we use something called a bullet. And to do that, I come right over here, and on my first line, I'm going to make a slash like that we call a bullet. That's going to show us that my first note is going to be right here. So we're studying growing plants to see what happens. We're going to take notes, so we're looking for what happens to growing plants. Our first page, we're going to stop and think and summarize what happened on this page. Well, I know that this page was about pollination. So my first note is going to be about pollination. And then I'm going to put these dots right there. And let's talk about what pollination is. If we look back at our first paragraph, it says that before a seed can begin to grow, a grain of pollen from the stamen must land on the stigma at the top of the pistil of a flower like itself. This is called pollination. So I'm going to go back and write what has to happen. So a grain of pollen from the stamen must land on the stigma at the top of the pistil of a flower like itself. Period. I'll go back and fix my word. So here we have taken words out of our book to tell us what pollination is. The rest of page 352 goes on to talk about pollination happens in different ways. Often wind blows pollen from flower to flower. Bees, other insects, and hummingbirds help pollinate too. All right, so now we see that another important thing is how pollination happens. So my next note will be, I'll put my bullet, pollination can happen when bees, insects, and birds collect nectar. Sometimes they rub their bodies on flowers and nectar. Pollen rubs off. Now, I chose how I wanted to word that. I used the words from the story and put them in my own words. Pollination can happen when bees, insects, and birds collect nectar. Sometimes they rub their bodies on flowers and pollen rubs off. Now, we're also asked to make sketches. Here we've looked at page 352 and I've taken 2 notes so far. A sketch, remember, is when we take our pencil and just quickly do an outlined picture to show what's happening. Look up here. They've done a sketch of the roots, stem, and the baby plant poking out. Over here, what we want to do on our page is our first note was what pollination is. You could draw a picture similar to the one on page 352. Then below that, we talked about how pollination can happen. Maybe I might draw a picture of a bumblebee collecting nectar from a flower. Let's take a look at page 353 and see what notes we can continue adding here. If a pollen grain from a flower lands on a pistil of the same kind of flower, it grows a long tube through the pistil into an ovule. This is the beginning of a seed. The seeds grow inside the flower even as the flower begins to die. As the seeds become bigger, a fruit or pod grows around them. The fruit or pod protects the seed. What was this page mostly about? 352, we learned about pollination and how pollen gets distributed. What did we learn about here on page 353? Yes, we learned about how seeds grow. Seeds grow when a grain of pollen lands on the pistil of the same kind of flower. Okay? Now, there were a lot more details there, but the main idea of this page was how seeds grow. All right, so you could draw a picture over here now, your sketch of how that seed grows. You could label the different parts, such as the pistil, the stamen, the grain, the ovule. Now, when you are finished copying my notes from this page, you can add your pictures, pushing pause, and then when you're ready, you can move on to page 150. Notice they tell you to read page 354 through 356. I want you to look carefully and see if you can take down 2 different notes from these sets of pages and draw 2 sketches. Remember, we're focusing on growing plants to see what happens. We have the beginning two steps: pollination, the seed growing. What do we learn about next? Draw your sketches, take your notes, then see if you can get down 1 or 2 notes for pages 359 through 360 after you read them, and draw your sketches. When you're finished, you can submit this on your portfolio. I can't wait to see your fantastic note taking and sketches. Have fun, friends!